This is Pace Per Mile. For more on the latest news, reviews, check out pacepermile.com. Like us on Facebook and join in the conversation on Twitter. With host Chris Nicholas, this is Pace Per Mile.
Welcome to Pace Per Mile's special segment, talking with inspirational people that are incredible within the athletic community. And today, talking with Jay Leon. Jay, you probably have had a lot of news agencies talking to you in the last couple of days, but realistically, you've been running for quite a long time, since you were 8 years old. But just in the last couple of days, you've been a little bit more into the spotlight. Is that correct? How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. More people have wanted to hear about my running in the last week than the previous 24 years combined.
We want to talk about not only what's happened to you in the last week, because I think you have a fascinating story, and there's so many branches of it. Let's first of all, you're from Austin, Texas. You just ran the Gusher Marathon, and you won that. That was your first win.
That was the first time I'd ever won a marathon by far.
Wow, impressive. What was your time in that marathon?
I did it in 3:07 and change. I don't remember the exact seconds.
My wife and producer here, she mentioned that you'd be amazed at if you just ran it by yourself, but you weren't by yourself. Tell us about that marathon, and tell us about the little girl that you were pushing there.
Well, I have a little girl. She is 6 years old, and I've done a few races with her. Until last year, they had all been 5Ks, and until 2 years ago, I'd never run anything with her, which it's a little bit sad that I waited till she was 4 before I started running with her. But I had asked a few marathons to let me in, and for obvious reasons, they didn't want me or her to have any safety issues, and they didn't want other runners to have to go around us. They'd all said no, and I'd accepted that. But finally, I was about to give up on whether or not a marathon would ever let me in pushing a stroller, and the Gusher Marathon was kind enough to do so, and man, was that an adventure.
Really? You not only crossed the finish line with your daughter, but in first place. I just can't imagine how the other runners' reactions when you were flying by them. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, there was a lot of people ahead of me. It was a double loop. So the very first time, there were several people ahead of me, and I had no idea whether they were half marathoners or marathoners. I assumed that there were some of each ahead of me. And then when I got across the halfway loop, and I was passing people even on the half marathon with the stroller, and, you know, most people gave me a smile, and it was kind of an out and back double loop. So there were, on both times, I saw people who were behind me, whether they were doing the half or the full, and they all cheered every time, which I thought was incredibly generous. And it was an incredibly windy day. There were like 24-mile-an-hour gust winds, and during the half marathon, there were these 3 guys that tucked in behind me for 2 or 3 miles of it, so I could block the wind for them. I'm like, really? You're letting me block the wind for you? That's amazing.
Nice.
When I crossed the halfway mark and I had to go back out and do the course again, I didn't see anyone. No one anywhere near me in front of me or anywhere near me behind me. And then the guy on the bike started biking next to me, and I assumed that was just courtesy because they had let me do it with a stroller. And about mile 14 or 15, I'm like, how far back am I? He says, there's no one ahead of you. I just couldn't believe it. I'm like, are you kidding me? There's nobody ahead of me? And then the pressure was on, because you want to run for fun above all things. I want to run with my daughter above all things. That was the only reason I'd gone out there, because someone had finally let me in with a stroller. And I just wanted to be able to say that I'd finished a marathon with my daughter. And then to find out you're in the lead, you know, I'm like, well, now I have to keep it going, because my original intention, honestly, was I'm going to go give it what I got and see how long I can hold it. And I assumed that it would be one of my slower marathons. I just figured at the end I wouldn't be able to hold it, and I'd have to walk in the last X number of miles, whether that be 2 or 6 or 7, and I'm okay with that. To me, I just wanted to get across the finish line. But I still wanted to go out as hard as I can, give it what I had, and try to see how close I could get to my non-stroller time weekend. And so I had run it without her, and I got a 3:09 on that one. And I had a hard time during the course, and so when people invited me to do this marathon, I'm like, guys, I just finished one. I'm not going to do 2 marathons 3 weeks apart. That's just unless they let. And I just threw this out there just to get them. There were a couple of friends that were going. I just threw this out there just so that they would leave me alone. I'm like, unless they let me in with a stroller, I'm not going to do the Gusher Marathon. And so I emailed the director, and she originally said no, and then she slept on it. And she said, I've been thinking about your story, and you know what? It's a no-brainer. We're letting you in. And then I had no excuse to not go with my friends that were doing it. I mean, this was a marathon that I'd never honestly heard of. And then I signed up like 10 days before and now it turned out to be an incredible part of my life.
Well, and you were 6 minutes ahead of the second place finisher as well, right?
Yeah, I had no clue where the second place guy was. I assumed that whoever was. I mean, I had looked at previous winning times, just to have some concept. And I mean, at some level, it is a race, and but if you look, I had the slowest winning time, I think, in the history of that marathon. And so part of it was conditions. It was pretty miserable conditions. It was hot, humid, windy, and no marathon has great finish, has their best finisher on that time. Even Boston, when it has bad conditions, the professionals come in a little slower. Under those conditions, it was the slowest winning time they ever had. But at the end of the day,
was it adrenaline? Was it what would you relate it to?
Oh man, you have your little kids singing in front of you, and she's sitting there singing songs from Disney's, "You Can Go the Distance," and it's the time of your life, so live it well, and she literally sings. I have a little speaker that I put on there, and she sings along, and she sings as loud as she can, and she's sitting there going, "Hey, can you go faster, Daddy? Can you go faster?" Other half marathoners and marathoners on some of those out and backs. I mean, that was the most I've ever gotten cheered on in my life. And I mean, I won meets in high school and in college and in junior high, and I think if you put all those cheers together from my entire life versus this marathon alone, I got cheered more that day than all of those combined. When you've got your inspiration in front of you, and you've got complete strangers and friends cheering you on, it's a mental game.
Well, and you've got your 6-year-old daughter, Kiana, singing along, and they're cheering for her and for you, and I think that's just, that gives you the kick that you need. All right, Jay, I know that Kiana is standing right next to you, so we're going to ask her a couple of questions and chat with her for a few minutes. Hi, Kiana, how are you?
Hi.
Is it okay for me to ask you a couple of questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. Kiana, how are you doing?
We're kind of just sitting there.
You were just kind of sitting there in the stroller?
Yeah.
Yeah. Was it fun, though?
Yeah.
Now, this wasn't your first race, though. You've actually been pushed in a stroller with your dad, but you've run your own races, too, right?
Yeah, but this is the first marathon.
Oh, very cool. So your first marathon. I love it. Did you get a chance to hold your dad's medal when he finished?
The finish medal or the winning medal?
Both of them. Did you get a chance to see them?
Yeah, my daddy said the winning medal was mine because I came first and he came second.
So are you going to be running your own races in the future?
I run like little kids' Ks.
Oh, very cool. And you do well at those?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us for a few minutes, and your dad is very inspiring. Now, she's not always been in tune with your whole race, though. Is that right?
Right. No, I don't. I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, but it wasn't until I got cancer that I started running with her. I mean, there are races that are stroller friendly, that the shorter distance, the turkey trot has a stroller division where you can win a trophy if you're the first guy to come in with a stroller. And most people doing those is more logical. They do that when their kid's 10 months old and 2 years old, and I had never ever done it till she was almost 4.
But now you're not going to stop, right? I mean, this is going to be an activity that she can take part in as well as you throughout the rest of your career, or as long as she wants to be pushed, right?
As long as she's willing to hang out in the stroller, I'm ready to do it. And I did a half marathon in October, a 30K in January, and this marathon in March. And so now, those kind of build confidence that both her and I have some fun doing it, and it's, we've got the endurance to do it together. And so as long as she likes it, but we're also doing some stuff with her. Like, it's not just her hanging out with me. Like, she did her first Kids K. She did her first. They had an all-comer track meet here in Austin, and she came, and clearly she's kind of wired like me, because I sent her up. You could sign up for any event, and I signed her up for the 60 and the 100 and the 200, thinking that was long enough. And the next time around, she wanted to do the 400, and she wanted to do the 800, and then she wanted to do the mile. And so she apparently likes running for a long time as well. So
we're talking with Jay Leon here on Pace Per Mile, and Jay just won the Gusher Marathon, pushing his 6-year-old daughter. And Jay, not only inspiring your daughter, but recently your mother, 60 years old, she just finished her own half marathon, correct?
Well, just for the record, my mom's not 60, she's 29.
Oh, okay.
But, she's going to be 29 for as long as anything exists, I think.
Yeah,
but on her 31st anniversary of her 29th birthday, she was thinking about doing a half marathon, because she's watched me run my entire life, and she has cheered me on many of those times. And so she decided to do her first half marathon right there in her hometown of Odessa in West Texas. at the Crossroads Marathon, and I got her to do it partly because I said I would do it, and they'd let me do it pushing a stroller. And they were kind enough. They were actually the first race ever to let me in pushing a stroller. And I came in second at that race, and my mom was the very last half marathon finisher. And I finished it with Kiana, and then she stayed with Grandpa. I went back out to finish it with her, and I had to go back a little further than I thought I would. But we ended up finishing it together, and she was literally the last finisher. But there were people who were behind her, but it was actually a pretty cold, windy, bad weather day. But everybody behind her decided to drop out. They had a van that would pick you up. I forget what it's called. They had a van that would pick people up who. And so there were, some people that dropped out behind her, but I was really proud of her. When I got to a water stop, they said, "There's no one left on the course." I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" And then they're like, and then she was literally just around the corner, and she was the last finisher, and we did the last couple miles together.
And how did she feel when she crossed the finish line?
Oh
with
man,
you?
she was screaming, I think, louder than I screamed when I won a marathon. And to me, that's the bigger victory, to do your first one, to do it when it's something completely new to you.
Now, you've put 7 marathons under your belt, a lot more 5Ks, 10Ks than that. Is that right?
Right. I had never actually run anything longer than a 10K till 3 years ago. Okay. And I just wanted to do one marathon. I just wanted to knock it out of my belt, under my belt before I turned 30. And it's kind of it's a whole other game. I'm not sure I recommend it to everyone, but there's a reason that everybody gets medals at the end of half marathons and at the end of marathons. You pushed yourself. You've gone the distance literally, and you, at the end of the day, you realize you've accomplished something.
And, we don't want to let those 5K and 10Kers don't think that, 3 miles or 6 miles isn't important, because it definitely is. But, yeah, the longer the distance, the harder mentally and physically you have to push yourself.
No, I mean, 5Ks and 10Ks matter as well, and I do those too. In fact, I actually had done a 5K the Sunday before the full marathon. I had done a 5K before the Gusher Marathon, and they're different abilities and different intensities, and they all matter. And there's some reason some guys do track, and some guys do marathon. You have to find kind of the distance that keeps you happy and that keeps you going and that matches up with you.
Most definitely. We talked about the exciting parts of pushing your daughter across the finish line, getting your mom to run her first half marathon. You've been a track star and running great races throughout your career, but you have not done this easily, I would say. I mean, this has been a challenge for you because you've had your own personal challenges when it comes to brain cancer, right?
I always blame my running group for brain cancer, with tongue in cheek. Obviously, it's not their fault, but it was the very first time. I'd been running with them for about a year, and it was the very first time I ever came in first in the workout. And the very next day was when I had a seizure and the cancer stuff started. I'm like, "See, running fast is giving me cancer," and they always laugh about that. They're like, "No, it's what's keeping you alive." And I think they're right about the second, and are wise to ignore my joke. And it was just, I actually would have a biopsy, and I was the first person in the hospital that ever asked permission to go running, because the seizure was on Friday, and I would have the biopsy on Monday, so the weekend was just sitting around doing nothing, which was not the way I'm wired, and it was tough. And so my doctor let me run around on the hospital grounds, and that's the official version of the story. But I had a friend with me the entire time, but we ended up leaving the hospital grounds and getting an 8-mile run in. And he's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I need to get off this hospital ground." And so he ran with me, and I had to take a little bit of time off after the biopsy, but I just kept training for the Austin Marathon while we were doing tests, WADA tests, EKGs, MRIs, blood work, all kinds of things, trying different drugs, just because it was the one thing that felt normal. It was literally just one foot in front of the other. And I'm like, well, I can still do this.
Very true. And that kind of relates into the 1,000 days of running. Was that during this 1,000 days?
No, I did that a few years ago. That's actually what got me kind of back into running. I'd put on a little bit of weight. You decide whether a little or a lot is 35 pounds from my track days. And I had kind of stopped running. I just kind of got involved in other things and was having too much good food and not any exercise. And someone handed me a picture, and I looked at it. I'm like, "That's not what I look like." And they're like, "Yeah, that's what you look like." I'm like, "I'm not that fat." They're like, you're that fat. And I'm like, so I decided to start running again. And the original plan was to just run 3 months straight. It was 2 miles minimum. And, and it was just running, jogging around the neighborhood. There were no races or anything like that. It was just a way to get into shape. And the very first time I ran, I literally did 2 miles. And I hadn't run in almost 2 years. And man, that hurt. I'm like, I can see why people don't run. But I started doing it and I got back in better shape. And then we had kind of some family issues down the line. And I just missed a day. And so it took me a little bit, but about a month and a half, 2 months later, I started again about day 600. And the second time I did it, and I finished 1,000 days, and that was great. And then I've kept running since. And after the surgery in March of 2011, I had to stop running for a while because, I had staples and steroids and all kinds of things that were going through my system. And I literally had a swollen brain that was my head was a lot bigger than it's ever been. So they told me I couldn't run. So I'd go walking with people, just because I didn't want to sit still, but I had to have people with company. And so I had to stop running for about 5 or 6 weeks was before the doctors let me start running again. And the very first time I went running again, I did only 2 miles. And then just like I had almost a decade before, I'm like, yeah, running sucks. This sucks because if you're out of shape, that first run feels incredibly painful. Even literally 2 months before you'd done a marathon, you can get out of shape if you're just sitting doing nothing. And so, but I knew that would get better the second time around, and so I got back into it. And it would be a while before I'd start racing again, but it again just kept being what was normal, one foot in front of the other.
And let's fast forward to today. Are things okay?
So with my cancer, they can't get it all out, because if they did, I would have no memory or language function. So we're monitoring it. My doctors have been realistic that if technology, unless something breaks through in technology, that, statistically speaking, odds are I'm not going to be 40. But they're also optimistic. They're guys that are working on research. They're guys that are working on new things, and they hope something will come. And last Monday, I had an MRI, and I like the fact that they all get my attitude. My neurosurgeon at Duke, Dr. Friedman, he's a runner. My neuro-oncologist here in town, Dr. Valiant, he's a runner. And so they get that this is my therapy. Maybe the reason I'm running so hard is how badly I need therapy, but they understand that that's kind of how I deal with the stress, and they would much rather exercise, which is a natural way to deal with stress, which is good for you, than, hitting a bottle of tequila or watching TV. Or they've never discouraged the running, which I appreciate immensely.
As you know, I wouldn't say many, but there are the stories out there that they have to deal with almost every day. Somebody dealing with this condition or this issue, not just your common injuries that come from running. So I think they're more mentally prepared. Do you kind of see that when you talk to them?
I do. And we had after the surgery, because it was a high-risk surgery, there was actually a team in place for all kinds of things. There was a neuropsychologist, and there was a physical therapist in case I needed to do some of that stuff. And one of my friends, Matt, who ran his first marathon in Austin, and he had to relearn to walk and talk after his brain surgery. And so to me, those kind of guys, and he finished his first marathon, and it took him a few years after his surgery before he was capable of it. And he had never been a runner, but that he did his first marathon. And I met another friend who did their first 5K, and it would be very easy. For me, running is actually, I think, easier than most people, and just simple frankness. But I'm really proud of these guys that had to relearn to walk and talk, and those are things that most people don't have to do, and they still decide, rather than just lay in a bed, that they put the effort out, and that eventually translates into doing races. And Matt did his first half last year and his first marathon this year, and I met someone else who did their first 5K this year. And so between those guys, I met someone who had half their leg removed and they have to wear a brace, and they've done a marathon. And my mom at 60 doing her first half. I don't know that anybody's got a valid excuse for not getting off their couch and doing some exercise. It may have to be different for different people, but those are the people I'm a lot more proud of than me winning a marathon.
Well, and I think everybody keeps everybody going, though, as well, when you meet individuals like that are in similar instances or similar situations as yourself, maybe more extreme or less extreme, but that keeps you going.
Sure. And that's what I always say. And when my mom did her first half, she did the vast majority of it walking. And she actually finished behind the person who won the marathon and a few of the marathon winners, which happens all the time. It's literally one foot in front of the other, and that's something that my daughter can do. And just to get out and just keep walking or get running, and I think that's great.
You had mentioned scholarship for your daughter.
The Gusher Marathon was kind enough to set up a scholarship fund for my daughter, and they're incredibly generous people. I mean, if nothing else, demonstrated by the fact that they let me in pushing a stroller. That alone shows how good their heart is. And they said, "Look, can we set up an account for your medical bills?" I'm like, "I'm all right with that's my problem." They're like, "Can we get you something to help you out, some creature comforts. I'm like, guys, those are my problems. And they said, look, we'd like to set up a scholarship fund for your daughter. And I don't know that there's anyone in the world that would say, no, don't give my kid a scholarship. And so I appreciate them doing that. And so they've set one up, and they set it up a few days ago. And, I ran to be with my daughter, and it's incredibly nice of them to set up some of that, relieve some of the future worries that I have about her.
That's great. There are a lot of great races throughout the country, and the Gusher Marathon is certainly one of them, to not only be a great race, but also do something for you as well. So as we wrap up today, what would be some advice after everything that you've been through, the struggles, the triumphs? What would you tell our listeners that are listening to Pace Per Mile and your story today?
Just find something that keeps you going. I mean, I had a couple of friends, and they run together, and he is not her speed, but they ran their first marathon together, and he proposed at mile 24. And Matt had to relearn to walk and talk. My mom did it because she wanted to have something where we all did it together. There are those of us who are always trying to get PRs, but you have to get something that whatever motivates you, use that as a way to get and share it with them. And I know people who they do couples tries, or there are people who do it with their father, or there are people who do it with a friend, and they're always racing against each other, even if it's just virtually. But I think we can all find a way to get up and find a way to make ourselves more active. And so whatever way that is, find it. And for me, it happens to be my daughter, and I got lucky enough to win a marathon, but I'll tell you, I would have rather come in last pushing that stroller than not do it without her. And so you have to find what gets you going and use it every day.
And you came in first, and I'm sure that meant a lot to her as well, as much as to you and everybody that you have inspired throughout the country that has read your story or listened to it right here on Pace Per Mile. Jay Leon, thanks for joining us on Pace Per Mile. You have an incredible story, and we can only ask to connect with you in the future, talk about something that you have inspired us even more about. So hopefully you'll join us again here on Pace Per Mile.
Anytime.
This has been one of the new special segments on Pace Per Mile with a special person doing something incredible. Check it out, and check out more at pacepermile.com. I'm Chris Nicholas.
At Pace Per Mile, we want to share your story. Do you know someone that has a compelling topic to share with the listeners? Help us tell your story or their story by emailing us today. info@pacepermile.com. That's info@pacepermile.com.